Okay, we're up to part 2, chapter 2. And I introduced the subject yesterday. Man has free will. That means he can make good choices and bad choices, which has a double effect. One is that an individual person's record can be mixed, and his presence in the world to come requires that there be no evil in him. So something has to be done about the evil that he has created in himself by his bad free will choices. And secondly, the whole of humanity has to form an integrated group. We spoke about this. He uses this phrase, I've never seen it in any other sefer, Kibbutz HaShleimim, the gathering together, the unification of the perfected. And we explain where that's coming from on the basis of our own speculation, that Adam and Chava were the only people, and had they succeeded, it would have been over, and they didn't succeed, and we are all splinters of their souls. So you're taking a unified original position, and you're splitting it up. Now, if the goal was for them to succeed, and they would have succeeded as a unified totality, and now you're splitting it up so that each piece is conquered separately, but you've lost the original unified totality. So I understand the Kibbutz HaShleimim as reconstituting that original unified totality. But then there'll be individual people in the population which don't belong in the world to come. And that has to be fixed, because then the population as a whole isn't all good. Population as a whole is some good and some bad. And that can't be. So he understands this as a double problem. And although, obviously, it's free will in both cases, and you could, I suppose, reduce one to the other, but the solutions are going to be different. And that's why I think he splits it up into two different problems, because the way you deal with the problem is going to be different in the two cases. So, the first thing that he says is, you know already that we're dealing with two worlds, this world and the next world. And we have a principle that reward for the good deeds that you do is in the world to come. Now, we have to be very careful with this statement. Schar b'ha'am aleika. Really, the Gemara's statement is in the negative. There is no reward in this world. But as I have told some of you, these statements, which are general rules always have exceptions. It's not me talking. Rabbi Yochanan says that in the Gemara itself. So you have to read these statements carefully and look where the nuances are and look at the dimensions where it applies and it doesn't apply. One way to do this is to modify it slightly and say complete reward or adequate reward for the mitzvahs that you do is only in the world to come. Complete and adequate. That doesn't mean there's no reward in this world. Those who daven every morning say it every morning. These are the mitzvahs that you do where their peros, their external produce, you eat in this world, but the main basic payment is in the world to come. So that's also in the Talmud. It says that there is some payment in this world for the mitzvahs that you do. The Rambam in Hilchos Shuvah, the 9th chapter, talks about being that the good that you get in this world for the mitzvahs that you do is tchilas schar, beginning of the reward. So it's not zero, but it's not the real reward either. And my homely analogy is, let's suppose you've done a great favor for the king, and the king says, you've done me a great favor, here are the keys to the warehouse, take any box you like. Okay, now, he gives you the keys. Are you happy? Why are you happy? You have 3 meaningless pieces of metal in your hand. Why are you happy about that? Because you forgot They're keys to the warehouse. So they're not meaningless. With those, I can get into the warehouse. I can't enjoy the keys, but I can get into the warehouse and get something good. So there is a compensation for what you do in this world, and that compensation gives you, so to speak, the keys to the warehouse. So it's not nothing. But when you say schar ba'amalek, it means adequate reward, complete reward, appropriate reward. That's only in the world to come. Okay. So then, that, he says, the world to come is where the person's disposition is based on the majority of his deeds. Now, the word majority also needs to be defined, and I'll come back to that in about 10 minutes. But that's where the majority of his deeds are compensated. And this world is a world in which a minority, which is different, could be compensated. Now, so let's imagine that you have a person whose general course of life is good, but there are failures. As we said, those failures create some element of evil in the person. What is to be done about that? Well, one thing you can do is tshuva. Tshuva is a way of guaranteeing that you leave the world clean. Mark my words. I didn't say that tshuva wipes it out. There are 4 categories, and they get wiped out in different ways. Some require things in addition to tshuva. But tshuva guarantees you leave this world clean. Someone who does tshuva, as I said, guarantees he leaves the world clean. Someone who doesn't do tshuva, what's going to happen to him? So he can get suffering in this world. And suffering in this world will also help to cleanse him, to purify him from the mistakes that he's made. So that either the tshuva does it, or the suffering does it. In this book, he doesn't mention Gehenna. The truth is, Gehenna is available in the entranceway to the next world as well. It's not really Olam Haba, it's in between. So, for this person, the minority is taken care of in this world, leaves him completely clean, completely good for the world to come. Now, what about a person who's the opposite? And again, I'm going to modify the definitions, but I'm getting the general structure on the ground, which is what he says in these pages. The opposite of the person who the majority of his actions is bad. Well, if the majority is bad, then he says this person loses the world to come. He's annihilated. His soul ceases to exist. But now we have a problem. If he doesn't go into the world to come, and we just said that reward for your good deeds, we're not talking about a person who's 100% black. He did good things also. And your good deeds can't be rewarded in an appropriate fashion only in the world to come. And he's not going to be there. So, where's justice? And he says his reward for his good deeds will be in this world. At this point, we have a problem. Because he's told us that in this world, you can't receive adequate reward for your good deeds. And he's told us that this person is not going to be in the world to come. And he's told us that this person has done some good deeds. And he's told us that justice requires that he be rewarded for those good deeds. And the solution, according to him, is that he's rewarded in this world for those good deeds. That sounds like a contradiction. He's not getting an adequate reward. Ramchal, as far as I know, in his writings, doesn't address this contradiction, but I know 2 solutions. I think each one is adequate, and they're both true. And one is this: maybe the compensation he gets for his good deeds isn't really adequate, but if he priced his good deeds in a certain way, if he set a value on his good deeds, an unrealistic, foolish value, but he set that value on his good deeds, and he's paid off in that value, he has no complaint. He has no complaint. So, for example, this fellow is in the middle of negotiating a business deal, and it's January, and the afternoon is very short in January. And it's 4:30, and sunset is 4:45, and he's got to daven mincha, but he's on the telephone making this business deal. This telephone call could get him $5,000. He's looking at his watch. He's talking faster. Maybe he can finish it. He's looking at his watch. Yeah, but he's not going to make it. And he thinks, yeah, but it's $5,000. So I'll skip mincha. I'll skip mincha this time because I got to finish this deal. Okay, so he just put a price on mincha. Mincha is not worth $5,000 because he's willing to skip mincha in order to make $5,000. So then, according to this answer, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, your price for mincha is not more than $5,000. For every mincha you davened, I'll give you $5,000, and you've been paid off. True, literally, in terms of the ultimate emes, reality, I didn't pay you what it's worth, but you set this price on it, you can't complain. For you, $5,000 is an adequate reward, and I gave it to you. That's one way to answer the question. Thank you very much, the one who brought this. Let me say the second answer, and then we'll discuss it. The second answer is this. It isn't just that, because Baruch Hu says, oh, you're not getting it. Remember, we talked about this. I'll talk about it now for some of you who weren't here. How can you imagine that God, whose purpose in creating the world was to give good, and to give the maximum good that he could give to his creatures, how could he set it up in such a way that some will be lost? Just lost, annihilated. Shouldn't he have set it up in such a way that everyone's guaranteed to make it into the world to come? So, the answer to the question, I believe, is this. It comes in two stages. First of all, you must understand that reward in the Jewish tradition is not like being paid for a job. You see a guy who's walking down the street with $3,000 a week, right? You don't know whether he's an economist or a plumber. Probably a plumber. Economists don't make that much money. Because for whatever you do, you get dollars. Reward isn't like that. Reward is more like this. The world to come is Beethoven. I'm speaking for myself. It's Beethoven, right? Now, in this world, you build your radio receiver. You build the receiver. For eternity, you're going to listen to Beethoven on this receiver. So, when you put in the woofers and the tweeters, and you put them in perfectly, and they're perfectly tuned, you're going to get really dramatic bass and very sharp treble. You know, the sound's going to be terrific. But when you put in the tuner, and you're a little lazy and a little irresponsible, so the signal's going to drift. It's going to drift because that's how you built your receiver. Now somebody says, I'm not interested in receivers. I'm going water skiing. I'm going to, build new machines. I don't care about what the receiver. Or someone who says, I'm not interested in the whole project. I'm putting out my eardrums. Now it's a question of the world to come. Well, we're not barring him. There's just no point in his going there. There's no point in his going there because what the world to come is doesn't apply to him. He's rendered himself incapable of receiving what the world to come gives. The way that reward is related to your activity is to build yourself into the kind of thing that can receive the good that the world to come is giving. And he's made that impossible for himself. So the second explanation is, true, he doesn't get the appropriate compensation for his mitzvos, but that's because the appropriate compensation is structured in a certain way, and he, with his free will, has made it impossible for himself to receive it. No complaints can be made if he himself did it with his own free will. Now, at this point, the critic will say, okay, I see how it works mechanically. Given the principles of the way God set it up, I see how it works mechanically, but I will go behind these principles and ask you, Why did God set it up in such a way that the result of his actions is that he's lost to the world to come? We were starting with the premise that God's creation is for the sake of maximizing the good. This doesn't sound like maximizing the good. So here's the ultimate, as far as I understand it. I worked on this for many years and talked to people about it. And this answer I found myself. There's another more difficult question which I got from somebody else, which I'll probably tell you on another occasion. But this is what I got in my own hand. Let's consider, so to speak, God's alternative in setting up the system. Our sources tell us that when a person goes to the world to come and he sees the condition that he's in, he's matzdik alav es hadin. He says, this judgment and this placement is perfectly justified because I can see that the basses and trebles are sharp because I built them right. And I can see that the signal drifts because I was lazy and irresponsible putting in the tuner. He can see piece for piece that what he's getting is a result of what he did. Now, let's ask not only about his condition in the world to come, let's ask about his being in the world to come rather than not being in the world to come. What about that? Just the very bare fact that he's there rather than not being there. Can he also say, I see why I'm here rather than not because I did these things and that's why I'm here. And had I not done them, I wouldn't be here. So my being here is also justified by the actions that I performed. Can he say that or not? Well, here's where the divide in the two strategies applies. If God sets it up in such a way that everyone's guaranteed to be there, then no one can say that he's there because of what he did. Because no matter what he did, he'd be there. What he did had no contribution to his being there. That was automatic and guaranteed. So, if you set it up in such a way that everyone is guaranteed to be there, then for everyone who's there, there's a dimension where he can't say, I have this dimension because of what I did. Everyone loses. Everyone there loses a certain dimension in the accomplishment of being there. The other alternative is set it up in such a way that your actions determine whether you're there or not. Okay, but then because it's free will, some people's actions will determine that they're not going to be there. That's also a loss. But it's not obvious which is the bigger loss. Especially as we will see, there are all sorts of mechanisms to maximize the number of people who make it so that the number of people who don't make it is really minuscule. So you're in the policy that God adopted, everyone who's there, which is 99.9999% of the population, everyone who's there gets the extra dimension of being there because of the actions that he performed. And the loss is the 0.0001% aren't there at all. Versus the other possibility where everyone who's there will lose that dimension, but everybody will be there. It's not obvious that God is making the wrong choice. If the critic wants to raise an objection against God's goodness on the grounds that some people are being lost, he has to show that the some people who are lost constitute a bigger lost good than the lost good of the dimension for everybody who's there of being there because of his own actions. And I think the critic is going to have a hard time showing that. So at the very least, there's no objection here against God's goodness, even though the system contains the possibility that some people are lost. And I will finish just by remarking that the Ramchal is not consistent on this point. In other Sfarim, he writes that no one is lost. I have asked Ramchal scholars how they deal with that contradiction. Maybe it's not really a contradiction. Which ones did he write first? Maybe he changed his mind. I have not been able to get an answer to it. I myself wouldn't suggest an answer. It's beyond me. If you go back to the medievals, Maimonides says what the Ramchal says. I told you he follows Maimonides very often. And Nachmanides says no. No soul could ever be lost. So this is an old difference of opinion. This is not something which was invented 250 years ago. They're both strains of the Jewish tradition. What to say about them exactly, I don't know. Yeah, question?
I was under the assumption, clearly it's mistaken because what you just said, that everybody has the ability to go to Gan Eden, not that everybody is going to Gan Eden and you can goof it up. and that's a choice that only you can make.
The Ramban says no.
But it's not that way.
The Ramban says no.
So when it says Kol Yisrael Chelek, that means everybody is going.
You see, this is very interesting. There's the first mission in the last chapter of Sanhedrin starts with the words Kol Yisrael Yesh Lam Chelek L'Olam Haba. Every Jew has a portion of the world to come. That's what the words start. Right. But the immediate next words are, and these don't. The next words in the very same Mishnah, and these don't. So this is what I told you. The general statements have exceptions. There are exceptions. It doesn't mean everyone, every last one, right? So the question doesn't start. You have to understand that it's a starting position, but it can be lost. But now, worse than that, later on in the Gemara, there are authorities quoted in the Gemara who disagree with that statement in the Mishnah. And then the question is, who do we hold by?
But I'm specifically asking on the word chelek. That means it's a guarantee. I'm not talking about the exceptions. I'm talking about
the word chelek means a portion. So the Ramban.
So that would be the point of contention between the two people.
No, because the word chelek is prejudicial. The Ramban says chelek means a particular kind of position in the world to come, not just being there. There's a statement in the Talmud that certain people who are guilty of certain types of crimes, their souls are ground up into dust and sprinkled under the feet of the tzaddikim sitting in the world to come. Okay? So Ramban says, well, are they there or not? That's not annihilation. Annihilation is non-existence. They're there, but they have no chelik, because scattered dust isn't a portion. So they can be there and not have a chelik. So the word chelik is prejudicial. So these matters are subtle and complicated, and a lot of distinctions have to be made. Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing.
Okay. Yeah.
So if we're going with the assumption that every Jew does have a place in the world to come, if you were to take a Jew who keeps no mitzvah whatsoever, and a non-Jew who also keeps no mitzvah, none of the 7 Noahide laws, right? And they both died. By that logic, the Jew who kept none of it, despite not doing anything more than the non-Jew, would have a place in the world to come. So wouldn't that mean an unfair system?
No, and the assumption is not correct, because without doing mitzvahs, without perfecting, I mean, the Ramchal's description is kibbutz hashleimim, the gathering together of the perfected. And the exercise of free will is something which is the way in which you achieve your perfection, right? What you're leaving out of the picture is a major, major Jewish idea, which is reincarnation. So don't measure the person's spiritual accomplishments in a single story of birth to death. Rather, the soul or pieces of the soul come back many times. And the right decisions have to be made to end up with a perfected soul. And the question is what it takes to do that. And the failures of the soul can be handled with suffering, as we already said. But with no accomplishments, no, you can't come to the yes.
The father tells his child that he wants him to make money, but and he wants him to work for it. But the father knows that if the child doesn't work, he's still going to support him. So
You mean the son knows?
no, the son doesn't know, but the father knows.
Oh, okay.
So the child, he works for it and he makes money. So he's still earning it from himself, even though his father would give it to him if he didn't do it. So why can't God do the same thing? Meaning God gives you the option, earn it, or He'll give it to you. But even if He'll give it to you, it's still considered that you did it for yourself.
Because I think it's a clever scenario, but it seems to me that what it means to say that these actions are the reason why I'm in this position is that if I hadn't done those actions, I wouldn't be in this position. Otherwise, the actions...
Reason, but not the only reason that you're in this position.
Well, not the only reason. I just to me, to earn something, when you say I earned it, and how did you earn it? I earned it because I did this. That implies that if I hadn't done this or something equivalent, I wouldn't have had it. Otherwise, there's no connection between my doing this and having it, because I would have had it if I'd slept and done nothing. So then it isn't my doing this that gave it to me.
It still could cause it if like we said, like if you shoot a bolt, 10 bullets, the one that hits the guy is the one that causes it, even though if it wouldn't have been there, other things would have caused it. So you could still say that my actions did cause it, even though without my action, it still would have happened.
We're not talking about cause and effect now. We're talking about, this is what I said, everyone says the judgment on me is a righteous judgment because it fits the actions that I performed. So if I put in the woofers and tweeters, then I'm getting good treble and bass. That's appropriate because I put them in, and that's what I got, right? So I did this, and that's what I got because I built it by doing this. But if I put it together, and then it turns out that whether I put it together or whether I wouldn't put it together, the same sound would come through, then it's not my putting it together that's responsible for the sound. The sound would be there even without my putting it together. So it's not as if you did this and that's why you got that, and that's because it's a reaction to the fact that you did this, that you got that. Not at all, because it would have been there without my doing it. So my doing it doesn't make it happen causally, doesn't justify it. It's not appropriate as a reaction to me because it's not a reaction to me at all. It's built into the environment. I don't hear the.
But there are two equal causes to say. Like, how can you say it's because God gave it to me? Maybe because I did it.
You tell the class, I want you to do this in this project. Half of them do and half of them don't, and they all get the same reward at the end. So won't the ones who did it say, well, this isn't a reward for what I did, because this guy got the same reward without doing it. So it's not a reward for what I did. There's a difference between us. I did and he didn't. And we got the same outcome. So then I'm not getting rewarded for what I did. Indeed, it's almost not just, right? Why is it that I did more than he did and I'm not getting more than he got? So I think that cuts it out as a possibility of it's really being earned. Yeah.
Maybe it's that in order to achieve perfection, right, or in order to achieve ultimate good, you need to earn it, because that's part of ultimate good. But for those who don't earn it, they may not be achieving ultimate good, but they end up in Olam Haba. They end up with a reward without having earned it. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, but now I have to go back to what we said, most of it weren't here, in chapter 2, when we talk about what the reward is. The reward is not lollipops. I hope this doesn't disappoint you, but the world to come is not lollipops, not souffles, and not hot fudge sundaes, and all the other delicious things that you would like. Not tingling your nerve endings so as to produce pleasure responses, dopamine in the brain. That's not what it is. The reward is a certain connection to the Creator, and the connection is mediated by being similar to the Creator, so that you can relate to the Creator, so you can have a kind of give and take and a kind of partnership with the Creator. And if you're more interested in scuba diving and betting on horses, you're just not capable of receiving that good. So you're thinking of good in this world, but in those terms, which are the ultimate good, you're not going to be qualified. By the way, let me just add something here. Since you asked this, Rav Dessler has a very interesting sort of mental experiment. He says you want to appreciate how it is that you don't understand the world to come. So he has grades of pleasure, maybe something like Lahavdil John Stuart Mill, who talked about not only quantities of pleasure but qualities of pleasure. Those of you who study utilitarianism, people prize, they value physical pleasure, and they despise and feel they're compromised by physical pain. Okay, it's August 15th, you're in southern Italy. Very hot, very humid. You're in a small village. The village has no air conditioning, and you're sweating. You're sweating, right? I have a suggestion. Take off your clothes. You'll be cooler that way, no question about it. Go naked. You're probably won't. Why not? If you are, as some critics try to tell me, I'm just a slightly smarter squirrel, I'm just an evolved animal, and bodily pleasures and pains are all there is for me. Well, it's not true, because then you would take off your clothes, and you won't. Somehow, your dignity, the respect that people pay to you, how they look at you, and how they evaluate you, means something to you. It doesn't mean anything to a dog, or a hippopotamus, or an orangutan, not even to a porpoise or a chimpanzee. So apparently your basic respect is more important to you than your physical pleasure and pain. Okay, now let's go up another step. You love someone. This person loves you. You have a deep, precious love relationship. And a situation occurs where to do for the other what the other needs, you'll have to do something that will cost you your reputation. People are going to make fun of you and despise you. They'll kill you on TikTok. Right? Many people would say, I'm sorry, this love is more precious to me than all of that. I'd rather be an outcast and cancel all my social media than lose the love of this person. It's more important. These are levels of qualities of pleasure. Qualities of pleasure. I don't know how many of you can appreciate the following words, but for some people they are meaningful. There's such a thing in mathematics as a beautiful proof. A beautiful proof. You look at the proof the way we look at a beautiful painting. It's breathtaking. The beauty, the integration, how it explains what's going on with the result. Some are really ugly. You pound away and knock off that example and that example and that example, and you finish it up. You did 22 examples, you knocked them all off, and you got your conclusion. But it's ugly. It's ugly. It's just brute force. You know, like the Russians are fighting this war in Ukraine. Just knock down buildings, blow up buildings, that's all. No clever strategy, no great esprit de corps, just shoot more missiles and block down buildings. A mathematical proof? Yeah, it can be breathtakingly beautiful. That's a level of pleasure that's certainly far removed from sweat and heat and itches and physical pain. So there are levels of quality of pleasure. So Rav Dessa says, the pleasure of the world to come is about 1,000 steps up that ladder, or maybe more. Okay, I gave you 3 or 4. My mind boggles at about 7. Beyond that, I really can't see how to describe more levels of pleasure. But I know what's going on. What's going on is every step up, the quality of the pleasure is such that a much, much smaller amount outweighs a much bigger amount on the lower level. Not everything is amount. Some things are quality. John Stuart Mill's famous adage was, better a Socrates unsatisfied than a pig satisfied. There's greater pleasure in being an unsatisfied human being than there is the pleasure in being a satisfied animal. Peter Singer, too bad. When you're talking about all the Mabah, why can't they be there? Why can't they be there for exquisitely broiled lobster? Why can't they be there for gin rummy? You know, why can't they be there for what? Exquisite scotch? Right? We're not talking about that kind of world to come. That's not. We are not just slightly more evolved animals. We have a soul. We have an entirely different reality. That's what it was created for, not for animals to have animal pleasures. Now, you had a question in the back. No? Okay.
Oh wait, I think I did, but I think you answered it.
Okay, good. Yes.
Can you repeat that last part about when you're higher up the ladder? You said more pleasure outweighs a more amount of pain? No.
Let me say carefully what I said. Let's talk about respect versus bodily comfort. Okay. A small amount of respect outweighs a large amount of bodily comfort.
Right, like the Italy case.
Because that's right, the Italy case, right. Yeah.
Oh, now I remember my question was. So can't you make the argument though that like if I have trouble with something not respecting you, right? That causes almost a physiological reaction in myself. Like if I'm embarrassed, my face feels red, it's a very uncomfortable feeling. So can't you just define those sort of emotional issues as a more advanced form of bodily pleasure?
I don't see why. I don't see why. I don't have any pains in my joints. I don't have any rash on my skin that itches. I'm not suffering sunburn. No one is bending my arms in pain and so forth and so on. Why should you liken it to something which it isn't like? You can have people who do that. You can have people who, for example, when they're frightened, their muscles clench and their muscles ache. That can happen. It could cause bodily pain, but it isn't by definition bodily pain. It just isn't. It's emotional distress. You treat it in different ways. You have different types of therapy for it.
So can you just take the original utilitarian example and redefine it instead of as we're just people who seek bodily pleasure, we just seek pleasure. Squirrels are not able to access emotional pleasure. Our brains are just more advanced, so we have this extra avenue of pleasure.
Well, I think that's right, but it doesn't say everything. What you need to say in addition is that we ourselves have a hierarchy of preference between the different types of pleasure. Not just that there are various types. There's sirloin steak, and there's shrimp and lobster, and there's milkshakes and so on and so on, and they're all good. And the more you have, the bigger the variety, then the more pleasure you'll have from eating and so on and so on. But none of them compares to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. It's just outclassed. If I have a chance to listen to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony for 35 minutes or have an exquisite meal, you couldn't give me an exquisite meal to give up Beethoven. You couldn't. It wouldn't be on the page. Beethoven? It's just not it's a non-starter because it's a pleasure in an entirely different category. Okay? All right. So that's why the person is going to lose the world to come. And that's why you can justify the fact that he's being paid off in this world, even though the payment is abstractly not adequate. But number one, he's made himself incapable of receiving the payment in the world to come. And number two, he put his own price on the mitzvah. And if you pay him off at his own price, he has no complaint. You could ask, okay, he has no complaint, but how do you feel about your values that you aren't giving him what you know is really the real compensation? For that, I would use the other answer that he's put himself out of the class, so he can't appreciate it. So that's the basic picture of how the compensation works between this world and the next world. Now, I used the word majority before, majority of your actions. You have to understand, Ramchal doesn't say this explicitly, but Rambam does, word for word, chapter 3 of the laws of repentance. He also gives a definition that the majority of your actions determine basically what you are, whether you are a tzaddik or a rasha, righteous or wicked. But I have to warn you, the word tzaddik or rasha have 10 different definitions in 10 different contexts, so don't carry one over to the other. It's complicated, but here, let's go with the majority. But he says, what he calls the majority is not counting them one by one. It's not counting up the mitzvahs that you've done and counting up the transgressions that you've done and then seeing which is the bigger number, because they aren't of equal size. You can have one mitzvah that outweighs many different transgressions, and you can have one transgression that outweighs many mitzvahs. For all these remarks, he quotes explicit verses in the Tanakh. So if that's true, what is it that determines the weight of a particular mitzvah and the weight of a particular transgression? Now, the Rambam gives a very interesting answer. He says, this calculation can only be made by God, which means you can't tell. When you look at another person and you see what happens to him, you can't tell what his majority is, because this can only be done by God. And he gives God a title in that passage, which he doesn't use anywhere else, and is very rarely used, even though it's a quote from the Tanakh, Kel Deos, the God of Deos. Now, the word Deos has different meanings in different contexts. Rambam has Hilchos Deos, that's the laws of developing your character traits. That's the laws of building your personality. So Kel Deos means the God who knows the inner life of each person. Hannah, in her prophecy, speaks about her nemesis, Penina, who accused her of being phony and caused her a great deal of pain. And Hannah says, Kel Deos, God who knows the inner life of each person, knows her and knows what her intentions were and knows what she really was trying to accomplish. So Rambam says over here, only God as Kel Deos knows how to weigh up the strength, the importance of a particular mitzvah or a particular avera. Why? Because when you look at a person's action, you must distinguish strictly between the action and the agent. And evaluating the action is one thing, and evaluating the agent is another thing. And you can have a good action done by a bad agent, and you can have a bad action done by a good agent, and you can have an action which is essentially trivial in terms of its importance externally, and could be gigantically important for this particular agent, and vice versa. You have an action which externally is exquisite and extremely difficult and rare action, but for this particular agent happens to be easy, and therefore it doesn't count heavily for him. Only God, who knows the inner life of a person, what his inspirations are, what his training was, what his temptations are, what his barriers are, what his other concerns are, can evaluate the meaningfulness of the action for the agent. I want to give you a concrete example because people talk about this in other contexts. Take a parent, and I would take the father, who doesn't spend adequate time with his children. He doesn't spend adequate time with his children. And his children are suffering from it. Suffering his example and suffering from lack of stimulation and the rest. So we look at that and we say, this is wrong. What's going on here is wrong. Okay, now there are two subcases. Case number one, this person works in a 30-hour-a-week job. He's doing well. He spends 2 or 3 hours each night in the pub, drinking it up. He lives in London where there are pubs. And then he comes home and he talks briefly to the family, then he watches television, goes to sleep, and has not enough time for his children, his 3 children. Okay, it's outdated. His 1.6 children, parakeet, and dog, which is the average now. Okay, the other guy has 11 children, works hard, 50 hours a week, has elderly parents to whom he has to give care. And although he needs 7 to 8 hours sleep a night, he squeezes out and sleeps only 6 hours to spend an hour with his children in the evening because he knows it's important. Now, an hour isn't enough for 11 children. So he's not giving enough time to his children. But I don't think we evaluate the 2 fathers the same way, do we? Because the one had it easily available to him, and he sacrificed it for something which was purely selfish, short-sighted, insensitive, irresponsible, and the other is struggling in juggling a number of different demands, and maybe he's getting it wrong. Let's say he's even getting it wrong. He throws out an hour, juggling with everything else. He shouldn't have done that. He should have done 2 hours and sacrificed something else. So he made a wrong calculation. Still, he's juggling difficult responsibilities. He's trying to live up to all of them, and he's making a mistake. So even though the result in the 2 cases is the same, not spending enough time with your children, the action for the agent is entirely different. In the first case, it's a gigantic crime. In the second case, it's a nuanced crime in a difficult situation where he's struggling to do the right thing. Only God can measure that. You can't measure that from the outside. There's so many stories of people who people judged one way or another and then turned out to discover that their judgments were totally misapplied. I'll just tell you one brief story, then I have to quit. Berditchev Rav, Levi Yisrael Berditchev, once went to a funeral of someone who was despised by the population, and they thought that he was an awful person, He went to the funeral. Well, if he went to the funeral, everyone went to the funeral, but they were shocked. Why would the Rebbe go out for such a person? And he said to them, I'll tell you why, because he came before me with 3 din Torahs, three legal cases that had to be adjudicated, and he lost all 3, and that's why I came out for him. Really? That's the reason? So here's one of them. I only remember one of them. One of them was this. There was a man who was struggling to make a living, and he had a wife, he had children, and he felt that if he would travel 300 miles to Leipzig and work in Leipzig, he would be able to do well. But his wife would never let him go. So he told her he's going away for a couple of days, and he disappeared. He disappeared. But he told her before he left, if I'm delayed, you can go to so-and-so every Friday, and he'll give you money to live on. I've arranged it with him, and he'll give you money to live on. That's this guy. Okay. He leaves on Tuesday. He's not back on Thursday. Friday morning, she walks in and says, I need the money to live on. He thinks to himself, what? What? She says, the money, my husband talked to you about supporting me because he's out of the city and he can't give me money. He puts it together, he puts 2 and 2 together. Aha, the husband lied to her. He told her that she could get money from me, and it's all a mistake. He says to her, you're right. I forgot. You're right. You're absolutely right. Here's money to live on. This went on for years. He gave her every week for years. The husband did well. In the end, he comes back wealthy, and he says, he walks into the house, and he's ready to be shot. He left her with nothing. And he said to her, you see, she's doing okay. And he says to her, how are you managing? She said, what do you mean, how am I managing? You told me so-and-so would provide for me, and he provided for me. Now the husband's shocked, because he didn't arrange anything. So he goes to this fellow, and he says, what happened? What happened here? Well, your wife walked in. It was clear she was expecting money from me. It was clear she thought that you had arranged it. I couldn't disappoint her. So I supported her. So the husband is, he's been saved from Gehenna. He said, I can't thank you enough. Here, tell me how much you gave out over the years and I'll pay you. I now have money. I'm wealthy. And he said, I don't want your money. I want the mitzvah. I want the mitzvah of having supporter. I don't want your money. And he said, but I wasn't asking for charity, and I lied to, and I put you in a compromised position. I want to pay you. Aha. Difference of opinion, a legal dispute. He wants to pay and he doesn't want to receive. That's a Jewish legal dispute. Right. Each one wants for the other one. So the Yeshivat said he came before me, and I paskined he was wrong. He has to receive the money. There were 3 cases like that. Nobody knew. Nobody knew because he didn't want to advertise his righteousness. He was afraid of the deleterious effects of achieving fame, so he hid it. And he hid it behind a gruff manner and rejecting manner, but he helped people when they needed it. So they had no clue who he was. Now, this is a dramatic example. But in little cases, when somebody you see somebody in the morning and he's irritable, and you greet him nicely, and he brushes you off, and you think, I didn't deserve that. What's the matter with him? I was nice to him. Why wasn't he nice to me? You don't know what's happening to him. I'll tell you one more story. My Rebbe was the Boston Rebbe Zatzal of Boston, Massachusetts. I was in shul one morning. We were down in Shachris. After Shachris, someone there who was a known person came up to the Rebbe and started yelling at him. Really yelling at him in an abusive manner. I couldn't take it. I was shocked. So I pushed myself between them, facing this other guy, and I pushed him out the door. I came back. The Rebbe was quite calm. Quite calm. I thought I wouldn't be calm under those conditions. The guy would be lying on the floor already. I said to him, Rebbe, how come you don't seem to be upset? He says, I know what's going on at home. I know where it's coming from. Okay, Rav Nachman said, you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know him well. Down the chaschus, say at home he's suffering. That's why he's behaving this way. And therefore God doesn't judge him strictly, because he takes that all into account. So this idea of the majority, first of all, one action can outweigh many other, one good action can outweigh many bad actions, and vice versa, and we are not capable of measuring those things. So when we talk about someone's majority being evil, if God has a certain leniency with certain types of things because they depend upon the environment and so on and so on, that being the case, we will not be able to know where the person's majority lies. Only God knows something like that.